If the president is, in fact, that dangerous, I mean, as a lifelong public servant, as someone who took an oath to protect the Constitution, didn't you have a duty to come forward before writing a book?
Well, I think there are two kind of different concepts here that are coming together. The first is, what was our obligation as the investigative agency to address the situation in our hands, which was based on the information that we had. We thought that a potential threat to national security might exist. That being that the President of the United States may have attempted to obstruct justice in his efforts to thwart and impede our investigation of Russian influence. And if he had done so, why? Why would any American president try to stop the FBI from investigating what the Russians might have done to our election? So that's the responsibility that we had at the time. We navigated those incredibly, tumultuous waters in the way that we did. I think we made the best decision at the time with the information we had, and that was to open the case.
Why wait so long, though, to speak out? I mean, you could have, there's people who resign in protest over things like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you're limited in the way that you can speak out while you are an FBI official. I left under adverse circumstances, and in my estimation, the best way to speak out, the best way to present my thoughts about how I think this president is undermining the role of law enforcement, undermining the role of our intelligence infrastructure, and negatively impacting the men and women of the FBI and across the intelligence agencies' ability to protect this country on a daily basis. That's an argument that I felt like I had to make in a thoughtful way in that book.
The things the president says about the FBI, about the intelligence community, you have no doubt that has a negative impact on their ability to do their jobs.
Absolutely.
Because I've talked to a lot of former FBI people who say, look, they're professionals, they put their heads down, they try to just cut out the noise.
That is true. FBI people will continue to do their jobs under any circumstances, in the face of any sort of obstacles. They will continue to go to work and try to protect this nation and uphold the Constitution. But the fact is, when the President of the United States himself personally undermines the approaches and the strategies that we have to rely upon to get this work done, like working with cooperating informants, working with people who are willing to plead guilty in order to and provide information to the government in the course of doing that. When the president and his supporters continually perpetuate this false narrative of corruption within the FBI, that makes their job harder every day.
Well, I mean, one of the stories you recount in the book is that you were told by somebody who was briefing the president about North Korea nuclear capabilities. The president basically pushed back, saying, I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that they do have missiles that can reach the United States because Vladimir Putin told me that they didn't. The idea that, I mean, it's one thing to doubt U.S. intelligence, and one should be skeptical. When you heard that the president of the United States would take the word of Vladimir Putin over an intelligence briefer, which is basically what he also said in Helsinki in that press conference about Dan Coates and what Vladimir Putin said. And just what went through your mind?
It's astounding. I mean, it is. I've never heard any principal in the government react to intelligence in that way. This was not healthy skepticism. It wasn't pushing us to be smarter and more accurate and more incisive, all of which are good ways to react to intelligence. This was the kind of the ultimate step in what had been a struggle to get the president and the attorney general and other principals focus on intelligence from the very beginning.
You learned that story secondhand. Can you say who told you that story?
I'm not going to say who told me that story. It was, suffice to say, they were folks that worked for me who were assigned to that role to provide that briefing on that day.
Your book was delayed by the FBI. Your attorney suggested that they were possibly trying to silence you. Is there anything that the FBI censored about President Trump or Russia or any other topic that you think the public needs to know?
No. The process with the FBI was extensive. We took several months to get through a manuscript that normally, according to FBI policy, typically takes about 30 days. I understand that the issues that I talk about are particularly relevant, they're timely, they're national security issues. I think all of those things combine to make it a much more arduous process. Nevertheless, I am very happy with the product that came out of that process. and glad to have the FBI seal of approval on it.
One of the things that is not in the book, which obviously has gotten a lot of attention, is the conversation with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein about the 25th Amendment. This morning you said you didn't put that in the book because you didn't want it to be a distraction. I mean, it's certainly a distraction now. If you didn't want to have it be a distraction, why bring it up at all?
Well, I didn't bring it up, right? It was both that and the comments that Rod made, the Deputy Attorney General made about offering to wear a wire, both things that were shared with the press without my knowledge or consent or involvement. And so now that those things have been discussed publicly, and I've been asked questions about them, I'm of course going to answer those questions truthfully. But at the time of writing the book, those things had not come out in the media, and I felt like they're so inflammatory, and I think they've become a distraction to the bigger themes, the more important topics in the book.
I do want to ask, though, I mean, at the time that in the book, that Rosenstein offered to wear a wire to a meeting with the president, and I know you said you consulted with the attorneys at the FBI about that. At that moment, did you think that was a good idea?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Why?
not. I felt like it was an incredibly invasive and potentially precedent-setting thing to do. I didn't think it was necessary at that point. I mean, if you think about it, the reason you would send someone in with a concealed recording device to tape the utterances and the statements of a subject is to capture evidence of intent. We didn't need to do that in this case. We knew what the president intended. He made, through his own public statements, his statements to Lester Holt in the infamous interview where he talked about thinking about Russia when he fired the director of the FBI. So it was really a risky and controversial position that I did not want to put the agency in.
You talked about in 60 Minutes how you memorialize a number of your interactions with the president and contemporaneous memos, which is something FBI agents are trained to do. You did, some of them were turned over to Mueller or perhaps all of them. Did you document your discussions with Rosenstein about the 25th Amendment and wearing a wire as well?
I documented my interactions with Rod Rosenstein, and those memos have been provided.
So knowing what Rosenstein said about the wire and the 25th Amendment, as well as Rosenstein's role in firing of Comey, do you think Rosenstein should have recused himself from oversight of the Mueller probe?
Well, I don't know. You know, that's something that the Deputy Attorney General has to determine for himself. I can say this: it was an incredible time, and the simple fact that the Deputy Attorney General and the Acting Director of the FBI were trying to figure out how to navigate a situation in which we thought the President of the United States might be involved in obstruction of justice and might be doing that to cover up some sort of inappropriate relationship with the Russians. I mean, it was a head-spinning moment.
Would you have recused yourself if you were in Rod Rosenstein's position?
I was not in Rod's position, and I don't want to answer a hypothetical like that. But I will say that despite all of these conversations, the mention of the 25th Amendment and the offer to wear a wire, all these things that have become so kind of topical in the last few days, I think we've lost sight of the fact that Rod Rosenstein decided to appoint Special Counsel Mueller, and by doing so, I think the entire country owes him a debt of gratitude. Rod did the right thing by putting the right person in charge of that investigation.
With regards to the Mueller probe, to the launch of it, did Rosenstein give Mueller a specific list of people to look into?
I don't know the answer to that. I can't speak to the direction that Rosenstein may have conferred to Director Mueller.
Do you know, was the president's family being looked into either before the appointment of Mueller or after?
That's something I don't feel comfortable talking about as it goes to kind of could go to ongoing investigative matters.
Did you continue to receive updates about the Russia investigation even after Robert Mueller was appointed?
No, we put a process in place to ensure that our investigators, so the FBI personnel on that team, would take their direction from Director Mueller and his staff.
We're going to talk more right after a commercial break, but one of the things I just find incredible in your book is your description of Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General of the United States. Yeah. I mean, for people who haven't read the book, it's stunning what he did not know about the FBI, about the Department of Justice, what he was interested in, what he wasn't interested in. I mean, even you write that Comey early on, started with the basics with him, explaining the differences between Sunni Islam and Shias?
Yeah, every attorney general goes through some process of orientation, right, to understanding what the intelligence products are, where they come from, the significance of the authorship and the work behind each product. There is a huge learning curve for an attorney general to get over, and I think I was able to see Jim Comey try to walk Attorney General Sessions through that process. What became troubling to me is as we went further and further down that road, it was clear that the Attorney General was really focused on things that we did not think were particularly relevant to the threats that we were discussing.